Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where in the world you're joining us from. If you've landed here today, you're at the Moment Institute and you've joined us for our kickoff session of the Beyond Coaching Experience series. And so today, David is going to be joined by special guest Tammy Turner, and they're going to have a conversation about the future of coaching. So welcome everyone. And David, you can take it from here.
Great. So it's wonderful to see lots of familiar faces as well as some new ones. So glad that you could come and join us. So I've been traveling.
Great. Thank you, Terry.
There's Sherry Lowry. Wow, good to see her. I've been traveling to Australia for a long time, and one of the things I always found fun was to meet fellow Americans who were hanging out in Australia. And so quite early on, I connected with Tammy, and we've become quite good friends since then. And we're going to work on a little project together shortly, which I'll tell you about at the end of the program. But we wanted to start this series sort of to pick up where we left off, sort of mid-pandemic. Someone's got an echo in their background.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and just by default put everybody on mute as they arrive.
Yeah.
There we go.
We had a BCE program in mid-pandemic, and really enjoyed that opportunity to begin to explore kind of what are on the frontiers of coaching. And as those of you who know me know, I've been pushing on those frontiers since day one. And when we decided to offer these once a month to just to share kind of insights about what I'm observing globally in coaching, having guests like Tammy come on and share their perspective as well. And we're also going to do a collaboration with one of our faculty members, because we found that for a lot of folks, there's not really that many places where they're free to ask the big questions about coaching. Because at conferences, everybody's trying to consume and mingle and do all these things. And, but in our own practices, we're often left wondering, like, what is actually working, and what should I be focusing on, and how should I develop myself? And even some harder questions: is coaching the right thing? Should coaching become something else? And all these things that at least I know many of our students ask often. And so we just decided to have these series where there will be sometimes a guest, where I'll have a conversation with Tammy here in a few minutes around 5 questions, but then plenty of opportunities for you to ask your own questions and just kind of be in dialogue with us about what you're observing and what you're noticing and needing, as a way for us to begin to explore what our future as professionals might look like. So Tammy, it would be great if you would just, for those who don't know you, if you would just take a minute and share what's important for us to know about Tammy Turner.
Well, thank you, David. I appreciate it. That's always a daunting question to ask. Like, how much detail do I really share here? How much time do we have to share? It's a bit of a challenge when you're a coach. You're used to listening all day to have to talk about yourself. Yeah. But I guess just as a snapshot of myself, I grew up in Colorado in the US, and I have been in Australia since 1999, came over as an executive in the IT world. And I have been a professional full-time coach and team coach since probably the end of 2000, beginning of 2001. So a little bit of time. As David already said to you, we met in Sydney, I think at some conference or another, I would imagine. And have had some spirited conversations and some bonding conversations over time as well. So the two ends of the spectrum, I think, on that. And I think that, right now, the thing that I guess if I was held to the wall, I'm really passionate about is, how do we start as coaches really thinking about the collective? And what is that thread that connects all of us, and how are we impacting just by being one of that greater whole?
No, thanks, Tammy. What a great question. All right, and so we've, as Emily put in the chat box, we're going to be collecting questions as we go. We've got about 5 sort of prompts that I'm going to engage Tammy around to just have some dialogue. And about halfway through that, we'll stop and we'll let Emily sort of track what's happening in our chat box. So if there's questions that are coming up for you, reflections, curiosities, just put them in the chat box so that Emily has access to those, so we can you can speak to them and we have a little bit of conversation before we finish out our questions. And then we'll have plenty of time at the very end to sort of see what you think all this means and kind of what you would like to take from this for yourself. Yeah, so I prepared some slides, which we'll send you after we're done. But I thought, just for the sake of the spirit of what we're trying to do, I think I would prefer we just be able to see each other as opposed to having to see ourselves in teeny little boxes next to the giant slides. So, so I just want to share a few things about my first question, and then I want to turn it over to Tammy and have a little back and forth. And as Tammy said, we have a lot of common critiques of coaching, common aspirations for coaching, and we also have differences, which I think is great, because that's really the point of all this, is to really explore. And so one of the questions I'm probably most known for is, what can we do besides setting goals? And how could we please leave them behind and move on to something else more interesting and generative? And so I wanted to share a couple of things that I've been teaching on and reflecting on a lot this year relative to that question. And then I'll hear a bit about what Tammy might have to say, and then we'll kind of see what we think's what's happening in that space, because it's not a new question. So the first thing that I've started to really appreciate, I don't know if it's just getting older or what it is, but having, after a while, when you've seen thousands and thousands of clients and students, but I started to realize and ask myself, sort of a desert island kind of question. If I only had to track one variable with my clients, what would I pay most attention to? And this theme will run into question 2 as well, but I want to start here. And I started to realize that, as you'll see on the second question, that for me, the number one variable is the readiness of the client to go do something, the readiness of the client to change. Pretty much everything else for me is moot. And as you'll see in the second question, I think I know we have often in coaching an inverse relationship between what the research consistently says is most effective for clients and where we spend the most noise and time in coaching. So for me, one of the issues with goals is that there ends up being a focus out there in a different future without enough attention to what is the person actually ready for now. And I think particularly in the pandemic time, where we all feel a bit sort of worn out, distracted, we feel a lot of things. It's even harder, I've observed in many of our students and clients, to look that far into the future. And so I've started to really spend more time thinking about the second question related to goals, which was, what is the most critical time in the coaching process? It's not really a trick question, but for me, it's a way of realizing the most critical time in the coaching process for me is the moment I'm in right now. And so for me, if I put those two together, I start to realize that we spend a lot of energy around what's happening in the coaching session, around what's going on, maybe gathering lots of information or whatever. And the crucible for change for our clients is in what they're able to feel, notice, own, speak to in this moment in time. Yet, yes, change accrues over time, but almost never in a linear path, never in a predictable path. And for me, I'm much more interested these days, even more than I have been the whole time, to create these powerful experiences for clients built around what's trying to emerge for them in this moment in time. Because what's available to them in this moment in time is probably a good indicator of what they're actually ready for. And you'll see this a lot in clients when you ask them about kind of what they want or where this is going, and they kind of look out and they kind of start talking from their head about some possible future. Well, they're not even here anymore. They've left and gone somewhere else. And you can't change somewhere else. You can only change right here. And so I've just decided to spend more and more of my time in what we think of in our work as structured emergence, to be able to think about how do we reorganize how we approach coaching to be more attentive to readiness, more attentive to the client that way, and more attentive to what's happening in this moment in time. So I'm going to stop there and sort of see, Tammy, so like I know you've been in this dialogue for a long time as well, kind of what's on your mind these days? What are you thinking about this particular topic about goals?
Yeah, well, this is one of those topics, David. I think this might have been when you and I met, because I know you and I have both been on panels with the late Tony Grant, who kind of put the map onto everything around goals, right? At Sydney University, for those of you who don't know. And he's since passed away. And I think all along, this has been the conundrum for me in coaching, because we're kind of defined in coaching around having some sort of measurable objective or outcome. And we also sell coaching based on, time delimited factors. And so, we want a metric and a measurement and so on. The client wants a metric and measurement and et cetera. And so, then how do you do coaching if you don't have those factors? And then I would say, as a professional supervisor, then it's complicated also on top of that by the fact that you realize after a few years of doing coaching that, well, the client is changed potentially in that moment when you leave them, but in the following moment, they may not be changed. And so this elusive goal, whatever that is, that we set out or co-created together, whatever it was that actually what, a realistic, measurable, definable sort of a goal, like, especially David, I don't know if you've ever done this, but it's a bit embarrassing for me, as I've actually taught individual coaching with SMART goals. Now, how many people out there have taught SMART goals before? Yep. And how many people, like, you can waste hours on defining a SMART goal and actually get nothing done. So, but I wanted to pick up, David, on what you were saying about this linear versus systemic, because to me, these factors are the linear factors of coaching that we have been struggling with as an industry for a long time. And for those of you, I know there are some folks on this call that I have mentored before. So if we're doing ICF mentoring for credentialing purposes, I'm going to give you a structure and we will work around that so that you can get that accreditation or that credential, because that is kind of an industry expected standard. But is that the right thing to do for the client? And especially if you are a more sensitive coach, I'll say, where you pick up on things that are happening in the field, is that actually safe to be working with your client in that way as well? But equally, we need to have some sort of standards to be able to define and measure what this thing we call coaching is. Otherwise, we're just having a chat. So, it's all of these various different conundrums. And so, to me, I guess the thing you asked me, long-winded way to answer your question, David, but, to me, what I've been thinking about is that we, over the last kind of 2 decades that I have been, coaching and teaching coaching and things like that, we teach coaching quite linearly as well. It's like, here's the process. The client comes in with the content, the coach runs the process, and it feels really stale. If you've ever seen people who are learning how to coach from that perspective, it is the most horrible looking thing. Or it's a chat.
Yeah.
And so, whereas, things that I am interested about, what you were talking about, is that, if we go more systemic, even developmentally, where the client is right in this moment, like Bakarova's work recently on in the last kind of 5 years or so is really focused on the fact that developmental stages are not fixed.
Right.
And so, how do we then look at where is that client in that moment? And are they, exactly what you said, David, ready, but also engaging them in their readiness? Because otherwise then we might as well be counselors or what have you.
Yeah.
And so the last thing that I'll say, David, and I want to hear from you about this, is that, to me, I think that there's some interesting spaces for us around that, time delimited kind of conversation, let's call it, that has meaning and purpose, and that coaches know where they're at, the client knows where they're at, and that it's defined as a coaching session. But what are some of those elements? And I would say, to me, the sacrosanct one would be contracting. What about for you? And being present, I guess.
Yeah. I was thinking, sort of in, so several things stand out. One is I spend more time these days trying to help sponsors and buyers of coaching be more articulate about what they really want. And sort of try to weed out sort of false expectations of coaching, or the magic wand wish that we could somehow change their leader into something they're not. Helping them to be more, and then helping clients, particularly if they kind of go off script, and sort of, as most clients do, most clients don't take a linear straight line through to what their bosses said they should be working on. Most of them don't want to. They're interested in other things or adjacent topics. But there's a really great opportunity in the end for them to be accountable for that, to really, be in conversation with your boss about where the coaching went and what it's going to bring to the organization, or whatever. Otherwise, I feel like oftentimes where clients feel like they're supposed to comply with mommy and daddy, who said, we'd like you to clean up your room more often, or we'd like you to talk nice to your sister. And we want to, I think there's really a sort of for me anyways, a undercurrent in coaching. We're trying to help our clients grow up. And a lot of that means being accountable for your own choices, accountable for going against the grain. And the beauty of that for me is, like, think particularly when you were a kid, and you did something for the first time. You rode your bike without training wheels. You rode a skateboard. You did a pirouette. Whatever you ended up doing, and the joy that we often felt, and we became a different person in that moment because of what we had been able to accomplish. And I think the same is true for adult clients, that they, we say, the person who sets a goal is not the person who's going to achieve the goal. Otherwise, they already would have done that. They're going to become a different person by virtue of making the steps they need to make to be able to accomplish what they said was important to them. And so that's the person I want to inquire into, because that's the person that's actually in them, this the activated part of themselves that's actually going to be able to do something different. And so for me, I'm trying to help clients mature in coaching, be clear about what they really want, figure out how they're actually going to make that happen. And then it often involves negotiation with those who might be paying for their coaching, about where they've taken the coaching in a way that might or may not be exactly in line with this bullet point list that we were given about the things we'd like us to do with their client. So again, I'd like to move on to the second question, but again, if you have questions, either put them in the chat box. If you want to raise your hand, you can do that as well, because we can see there's, on my side, there's only one screen of you, so I can see all of you. So just curious if anything has come up for you. If you're a typer, you can just put it in the box. If you'd like to speak, do that. And if nothing comes up yet, we'll keep going.
David, while people are typing there, I might just add something to what you said
Please.
briefly, which was, I think that sometimes we can get quite into complexity around coaching about all of the factors that are happening. And sometimes, just connecting with the other person on a human-to-human level and just, being quite silent and going into, so, how can I be of service here?
Mm-hmm.
Can be the easiest sort of goal setter of all.
Yeah.
And then talking to the other about that.
Yeah. Because you think, Tammy, about, the teeniest of percentages of clients that actually know why they're there, even if they've got a burning issue when they show up, right?
So true.
Why they're really there. I mean, it's just very rare. Most of our clients are either, it takes time for them to figure out what am I actually doing here? What am I actually most wanting to be working on? It's not evident in the way they show up or even what they share with us in the beginning. So why would I set a goal for someone who's not even sure why they're there? Even if they were, it might seem clear at one level, but what they're actually going to be able to do about it or ready for is very often not clear to them at all. And I'm more interested in creating structures for them once they're quite clear what they want to do, and actually had some chances to practice that in this session itself. Yeah. All right. I'd like to move on, and then again, here we go. Yeah. As Killen's making a nice point there. I think one of the unspoken truths of coaching is how many of our clients quit as a result of working with us. Because they wake up and they go, oh crap, I don't want this job anymore. What am I thinking? And then this is the negotiation with the sponsor about the outcome, right? And so it's an interesting, for me, I think, just as if I put this out there as an invitation for you, I think there's a really extraordinary opportunity for us to engage sponsors differently than we do now. Easy to go in there to sort of take the list from them or the 360 results or whatever they're asking us to work with, and all the stories about why that matters and all the people that are going to be whatever. And I just think there's a space for more robust conversations on two fronts, really, well, three. What is the purpose of coaching? What is it that we most want to work on? And why do they think that's going to make a difference? I find, even when I have HR executive sponsors, that sometimes if they're honest, they'll be more truthful, but oftentimes I'm not sure they're really across what it actually takes for an adult to change. Like, can you have 4 sessions, please? And can you magically undo 50 years of trauma in this person's life and make them a whole and healthy leader? No, I can't. I cannot do that. And I'm really good at what I do.
Here's my magic wand.
Yeah, I don't have that. And so I think there's more to be done in a way with how we set everyone up for success, because the people that sponsor our clients and organizations, they have their own pressures, right? They have their own needs, which are often quite legitimate and important. And I just feel like we're called to having more honest conversations with them. So we're kind of going into coaching with everybody with their eyes wide open, even the client. And Sherry, would you be willing to share a bit more about what you're meaning by your wonderful comment in the chat box? And it's good to see you again. It's been a while.
That's why I'm here, David. You're always working on what's emerging. You always have been. And we met early in your career.
Did.
Very early, maybe even the first year. I am a strategic systems family therapist by background, who came into coaching partly for community. And I realized recently, and I'm within a very active coaching chapter in Austin, Texas also, and I've been involved in that for 25 years or so. I find collectively and sing and individually, coaches and coach clients always come for community. No matter what else they are seeking or are interested in, they all want and feel the need for and the pleasure in community. And during the pandemic, that exploded in my town in particular. Normally, I work globally in English-speaking countries. I don't necessarily work locally. And I've always, kind of like you, David, been doing things virtually for decades now. And in the beginning, it was by phone only. You'll remember that. We couldn't even exchange money online, much less documents. And so that's what brought me here today. I wanted to find out. I've kept up with you. I've tracked you periodically, but not directly. So I thought it was time to re-engage and see what David is going to be doing next, because I can keep up with what you're doing now.
Great. Sherry and I have some really fun war stories about efforts to overthrow certain things, and so it's fun to see you again. So I want to just share my related second question, and it also has to do with what I experience and observe about some disconnections. And I've always been what I think of as an applied scholar. I like researching things and writing about things and thinking about things. But I find that interesting. It's more what could be useful in this to actually help improve practices. And all of our work now, even integrative development as well as narrative coaching, is built to address several what I see as disconnections. The first is that when you look at the budget that somebody spends, like for an organizational coaching client, the vast majority of the cost of that engagement is for the coaching sessions themselves. If you look at the research around what has impact for clients, the session is not at the top of the list. What's categorically at the top of the list, as Tammy was alluding to earlier, in terms of impact from coaching, is what the coach and client does with the session after they've left, for which there's almost always no budget. And so for me, I still have not really mastered how to negotiate enough of the time with clients. But I would rather spend 15 minutes in a coaching session and 45 minutes following up and nudging them. But we don't have the construct around coaching. It was wedded, in my view, too closely to psychotherapy of the 50-minute hour. It was a frame that we adopted without even much reflection or critique. It doesn't match the research at all. And so I think another frontier for us all to explore is how do we, through maybe some augmentation from technologies, but certainly some augmentation of contracting, how do we align how coaching is deployed to match what actually makes the difference for clients? And it relates to the sort of a second thing about a disconnection. One, if you look in, this is where there's far more research in psychotherapy, but I consider it a sister profession. So a lot of the data from psychotherapy, which has been around a lot longer, I find often quite applicable to coaching as well. But if you look at kind of just like you go to a conference or you go to any kind of coaching event, what gets visibility in the industry tends to go often in the order of sort of methods, theories, information. Then we look a bit at coaches, and then we look a bit at outcomes. But then we look the least at the relationship, and by far the least at the client. Clients are hardly ever talked about at conferences. If you look at, we focus on our stuff, all the bright and shiny, what's new in coaching and what's the latest neuroscience trend and how is positive psychology going to help us and all these things, which actually have almost less than 1% of the variability of outcomes for clients. And then you go all the way down to the client. But the reality is that the variability of outcomes in coaching is an inverse relationship to where we pay attention. By far, in a way, again, the number one variable about the ability of a client to achieve what they want in coaching, the number one variable by far is themselves. The second is the coaching relationship. And then a very distant third is the individual coach, and at the very back by far is whatever method they were using. So but if you look at how coaches are trained, they're trained in a methodology often, and they're trained to focus on their own coaching. But in reality, that's not what the evidence would suggest in terms of what actually makes the difference for the client. And so I just finished a paper, which I'm having reviewed right now before I submit it in January, but I'm developing a competency model that includes the client, so that your measurement of your competency is not about how good of a coach you are. It's what you do for your clients, which is the whole point of coaching. So we all know people that can mirror and mimic great coaching, and the clients accomplish nothing. Right, because there's no attention to outcomes. And if I go back to what I started with, which was the at times daunting opportunity to help an adult change. And so for me, we don't really know a lot about, at least we don't talk a lot about what does the client actually need to do something with this epiphany that they just had in coaching. And the odds are very small, and what we say is that why we do experiments and not goals is because if our client can't do something new while they're with us, the odds are extraordinarily low they're going to do it later. When the pressure's on, the old habits kick in, the old environments reinforce old behaviors. And so I'm really only interested in what the client is ready for, and then what will they do with me right now in this session, in part, and the value of that I'm trying to really focus on is the quality of the relating to them, the quality of the relationship we've built, and their attention to themselves, so that they have an anchoring in themselves to do what it is they're discovering they most want to do in the course of our session. I know Tatiana's done one of these studies, but there's a number of studies that would show you that a caring, attentive volunteer is as, if not more effective than the average coach. Yeah. And the number one reason is not because the coaches are not good people or even good coaches. They get caught up in coaching. And my running joke with our students is that the number one piece of feedback I used to give when I could travel and teach live was I would just tell the person, please stop coaching. Just shut up and pay attention to the person who's sitting right in front of you. Yeah. What's happening for them? What are you noticing about them? What are you hearing in their story? And so for me, again, part of this whole question about the future of coaching is we know some things from the research, and we know some things from our own gut when we're honest with ourselves, often, not always, but often in our coaching. And so then how do we need to change how we think about coaching, how we teach coaching, how we look at our role in coaching? And I just feel like for coaching to really evolve to its next level, we have to leave behind some old assumptions about coaching, which I question were great before, but they're even less useful, I find now. So I'm just really curious first from Tammy. There's a lot there I've just said, I realize, but kind of what stands out for you and in all that in terms of where we can find a greater sense of alignment between how we structure coaching and what actually matters for our clients.
Well, you said a lot there, David. So I trying to come alongside you around this is that, to me, I guess I've been teaching a lot of team coaching training in the last 5 years. And one of the things that I notice is borrowing from individual coaching to help students make sense of what the team coaching environment is about. And so one of the things that I think we have been remiss about, I mentioned this in the first question, but we probably don't teach individuals enough about the ecosystem of what's going on. And so regardless of whether or not you're working with an individual, a group, a team, a collective of a gaggle, whatever we want to call it, is that exactly, David, what you just said around, so what's happening in the moment and what are those connection points? And it's not so much technique-y stuff that we're doing. It is some of that, obviously. If you can't ask a useful question, then probably the conversation is not going to be advancing. However, if we are afraid to take the risks and challenge, for example, or if we're afraid to use our intuition or what's coming through us in that moment, then that is not going to be fulfilling for the person sitting across from you in an individual construct. Whereas if you're in a group construct or a teaming construct, the system, the people within that will oftentimes bring things up, and then the coaches freeze because they're like, wait a minute, that's my line, you can't say that. Whereas, you know, or that habit of kind of being seen as the expert that we all have had to kind of play the game around of, oh yeah, for example, like I'm a master certified coach, both with the EMCC and with the ICF. And so, you know, when I walk into a room with a client, they're expecting a lot of me. So do I take the bait of, oh yeah, I have to be the expert now because I have those things behind my name? Whereas, and that's an ecosystem thing, right? That is the client's expectation of me. Then, you know, do I buy into that? Do I normalize it with the client, etc.? And we never talk about that until we get into supervision. I'm hoping that I see a few professional coaching supervisors on this session as well. But it's somehow or another, it's like supervision is bad or it's behind closed doors, whereas the concepts of supervision are about systemic thinking. And how do we take that into a one-on-one construct and be able to look at some of those disconnects that you were talking about, David, is I think one opportunity.
Have you ever had clients who have been willing to experiment with you about constructing the coaching engagement differently?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's an interesting question because, you know, I don't think I've ever had a client ask me what you were suggesting, which was, you know, 15 minutes in the session and 45 minutes of follow-up. But I think that, you know, throughout my tenure in coaching to date, you know, people will ask things of you that are not traditional coaching, that are within that engagement. And so things like shadow coaching, for example, or things like, and for those of you who don't know what that means, it means that you kind of go around and work with that client in the moment, in the various places that they might find themselves in. It might be that you're doing three-way coaching. And so you're with the client sponsor and or your coachee, or like I've done CEO, CFO sorts of coaching where there's problems between those relationships. So to me, I don't think that I've had the same kind of request that you're suggesting there, but I've definitely had, you know, here's what would be useful to me, or me suggesting things about, you know, it seems like we're not making traction. So how else can we kind of get your need met around X?
I've had a few that have done what I just mentioned. It sort of is coupled with another sort of observation I've made, is that often I feel, because a lot of the issues that our clients bring to us, they're complex. They have lots of variables, there's lots of factors, there's lots of perspectives. And I find sometimes they get kind of overwhelmed, like, where do I start? Like maybe they've got a souring relationship with a key person at work. Like, what is that about? And how do I do something about that? And so what I've observed, particularly in the pandemic, is just making the scope of the inquiry smaller and more poignant. And so I've found in that a couple of times I've had clients who maybe after half an hour say, I think I've really got the nub of this issue, the crux of this issue for me. Great. So where would that be helpful to you first? Well, I've got to have a difficult conversation with my team leader. So we might just spend 10 minutes or whatever, just processing that and then setting them up. And it said, so, and I had one guy ask, can you just call me like 10 minutes before the meeting and just give me a pep talk and remind me what I said I would do, and I said, sure. So I did that, and I said, only if you let me call you for 10 minutes after you're done and process it while it's still alive for you. Like, what did you notice about yourself? And because I feel like, as coaching adults, they don't have a safe place to practice these things and a safe place to get feedback about them. So the pressure to conform back to your old self is so high. And so I feel like we should have like playgrounds for coaching clients where they get to try out new things in the safety away from work and away from the glare of all the expectations.
Get on the bike, as you were talking about before.
Yeah.
Just quickly before we move on to the next question, I guess that I love what you're introducing here, David, is that I think that this comes also back from the in-person days of coaching, is that, that a session needs to be an hour or 90 minutes or 2 hours or whatever it is. And I can tell you, because I have taught many, many coaches about doing the 30-minute laser coaching sessions, and I've done probably 4,000 hours or more of them, that I love the 10 to 15-minute or 30-minute coaching session. Because people really get really quite get focused, as do you. Like, there's purpose in that. But the reason that I bring this up is the fact that, again, I'm kind of beating this drum today, but how often do we get caught up in time? And, like, wouldn't it be great if we could just have like a hotline where people can kind of call up and go, okay, I need a 15-minute, chat with you, David, or whatever, right? Or I need a moment just now, like now is the time I need to talk to you. But whereas we have to have office hours, or we have to book in to go see the client, or they have to come see us or whatever, and we are in that paradigm, and does that really serve? And maybe that's a starting place around having the conversation, when you have the conversation with your client. And putting it in your contract.
And I do put that in most all of my contracts is with some discretion, the freedom to text or email me or call me for whatever you need. But I think about, like, I was thinking back to like when we were young, and you want to ask somebody out on a date, or somebody's asked you out on a date when you're in high school or whatever, and what do? You go ask your friends, like, should I say yes, and what should I wear, and how's I going? Well, we don't do that in this adult like coaching world. I've got to have this all managed, and I've got to fit everything into my hour, and and I find that a lot of our clients, they just need those small nudges and those small interventions to kind of have the courage to go try something new, or So I'm just
David, there's a question in the chat that Indy put in there a little while back. I think some of the conversation has circled around it, but I wanted to elevate it here in the conversation. It says, I often experience clients as deer at the edge of a clearing, hesitant to reveal. Using that metaphor, what do you find most useful, effective in inviting them into visibility and ownership, and being able to start engaging and emerging, instilling confidence to go real or deeper?
Yeah, great question, Indigo, as always. Well, so for me, if you stay with the analogy of the deer, if you go right at the deer, you scare it away and it runs away. And so it's sort of like with the deer, that's why I love stories. And as those of you know, I use objects in the room a lot, because I find that in psychotherapy, it would be like projective devices. But if somebody's surfacing something for the first time, or maybe it's fragile, or maybe a bit tenuous, or maybe fearful, it sort of sneaks out in the story or through an element or character in the story. And again, if you come right at it, it gets shy and goes away again. And so I tend to most often come at this from an angle, if you will, and not in the sense of sort of adjacently, and this is where objects are really helpful, or metaphors, or characters in the story, is we get the client to see the situation and even themselves outside themselves, so they can be an observer of their own story, and they can actually process what that observation or that experience around that object with you, because they don't have to defend anything. They're just inquiring about something, even though part of them knows this is me. And so it's an opportunity for them to, in the safety of something that's been externalized at a distance, to become more honest about what's actually happening. And we might ask them, what do you notice in yourself? Or how does that feel to see that? Oh, it feels so lonely and far away. Really? And so we don't again bring it back to them yet, because it's still too close. We might just say, really, so what do you think this object needs? It just needs some company. It's all by itself. Great. So what kind of company would it use? And it may sound strange, but it allows people to think out loud and feel into something, and then slowly that sort of diorama, or that scene, or that mirror, you can sort of gently bring that closer, and then they all catch up to the fact that this was about them the whole time. And for me, it's a great analogy, Indigo, because that's how I often treat these things, that it's this blend of compassion and candor. And, if somebody's bringing a really sensitive topic out for their first time, they don't want a powerful question. It's annoying, or it's frightening. They want to be held in tenderness, like, I see you. I see how new and fragile and beautiful this is. And we're going to honor it by not rushing at it, but rather just holding it lightly and beginning to work with it until such time as the client shows readiness to embrace it. Say, oh yes, that is me. That's the part of me that I held in shame, or I was afraid of, or I've always wanted to express, but I didn't know how. So that's how I've tended to approach those things. And I find it, if to a more classically trained coach, I used to do these live demonstrations, they were baffled by all this, and because they were taught to ask direct, powerful questions. I said, but the irony of all that is that you will get to the answer. It'll take you longer to get to the truth of what's going on that way, even though it seems like it's quicker. I said, if you come at this in a more respectful, honoring, but very clear way, it feels profoundly slower, but it doesn't take any more time and get you where you really need to go much sooner, because you don't have to wade through the client's defenses to get there. Yeah. So I see your question, Stephanie. Yes. So again, but again, I was doing a session yesterday with somebody that I think has a permanent encampment in their head. I've never known them not to be living in their head. So to ask them a somatic question would not be useful yet, because they have no idea what they feel in their body. That's not how they live their life. So I have them think about it first. And then I said, well, if there was a color or a shape to that thought you just had, or if that, do you notice anything in your body happening when you say that thought or exaggerate that thought? And, oh yeah, I kind of wiggle. Oh, right. What's the wiggling about? And so again, I just find that if you go back to client readiness is the key factor, at least for me, that I observe often we're trying to talk too much about content with our clients and not about readiness. So it doesn't matter how, at some level, how brilliant the insight is if they don't know what to do with it. So I now spend more and more time helping my clients get ready. I spend, like as you would in a garden. You don't just wander out to the backyard and throw seeds in the grass, right? The bulk of the energy in gardening is preparing the soil. It's the same thing in coaching. But again, I've observed over the years, that's not where we tend to focus most of our attention. We assume that just because the client brought up the topic, they're ready to do something about it, which is, in my experience, not true at all. And so I want them to, like I said, to be more mature when they leave. And a lot of that is, for me, is like tilling the soil, helping them get ready. So when those insights do come for them, or there's epiphanies, or there's decisions, that now is a better chance of surviving. Yeah.
So, David, you've talked a lot about readiness here, and it kind of links to the third question around how can we shift our development? And, you know, since you're basing your premise today on client readiness, I wonder if you might kick off about explaining in your mind's eye what that means, because many people might not know what client readiness is in the way you're describing it.
Yeah. So So I'll put up this slide because it's just a slide I made. But in this, I created this slide mostly for coaches, but to your point, Tammy, I think it says a lot about client readiness for me. So in my, you know, people that know me enough, sometimes I can say things that are a bit outlandish, but just to make a point, but I don't. So in my view, in my observation, information is not very powerful in terms of helping a client change behavior. My most common example is, if information was effective, nobody would smoke. Everybody on the planet knows that smoking is going to be bad for your health, and yet many people choose to do that anyways. I think we overemphasize and overinvest in client knowledge, not clients' knowledge about themselves, resources about the topic, thinking about things, talking about things, processing things, all that, and the same thing for us in developing ourselves. We consume massive amounts of content as coaches. But again, that's not what fun, I mean, yes, to your point, Tammy, earlier, you want to have basic competency as a coach. You want to know how to listen, how to form a good question, how to reflect. You know, there's some basic content pieces that are helpful. But I go back to the readiness is, I think there's two halves of the readiness here. One is sort of being, that's what I think of as consciousness, which is a readiness in terms of awareness. If you pointed out something to the client about what you observed, like, were you aware that you slumped in your chair when you were talking about John in your story? I was not aware of that. This client's not ready to use their body to drive change because they weren't even aware that they were collapsing as they were telling the story. So then I would stop talking about the content. I would go back and say to myself, maybe what can I do here that help them become more aware and trusting of themselves? Build up that self-awareness and that consciousness before I would make any effort to encourage or support this person to try to go do something differently. Because if I don't, they're going to go into try a new behavior, but with an old mindset, and it's not going to go very well. So part of readiness is, can they hear me? Can they, to what degree can they let the truth, what they're observing as the truth in? How aware of their own physiology, their own breathing, their own mental state, so that sort of awareness of self. And then the second thing I'm most interested in is around contribution, which is, are they ready to actually do something differently, to show up differently, to try new things, to express from a different part of themselves. Maybe they're normally a very cognitive person. They're being asked to be more relational or emotive in their communication with their team. So what are they ready to and willing to go try and do? So again, we don't spend a lot of time, at least in our work in narrative coaching, talking about information or content, or even gathering lots of data about their situation. We're really interested in what can they absorb, be with, self-regulate around, to build up their sense of consciousness and self-awareness and awareness of self with others. And to your point about ecosystems, Tammy, and then looking at what are they willing to try. So like, for example, let's say they want to be more assertive at work. And then you say, great, so tell me something right now you'd like me to change about how I'm coaching you. Okay, so note to self, they can't even give me feedback. How are they ever going to give their boss feedback? They're not. Okay, so now I know they're not very ready for this yet. And so that's fine. It's just feedback for us. So great. Now I know that I might have to drop down a few more levels and kind of work up to giving me feedback. And then we can process them giving me feedback. Or it could be, you could use an empty chair and say, imagine your best friend sitting over there, or your partner. What is it you've been wanting to tell them, but you haven't? So it's all about building up their confidence, their self-awareness, their languaging, their skill. And so it's really an opportunity for them to be able to feel like whatever first steps they're going to take when they leave the session, they're more than likely to be successful. Otherwise, if they don't do that, they're going to have a high from the coaching session, believe that equates to knowing what to do, go out back to work and not do well. Because your boss isn't your coach. They have a different set of parameters about their conversation with you. And so we're trying to look at readiness in both of those dimensions.
So I think what's interesting about what you're talking about here, David, and some of the techniques you're employing for those who aren't aware are a lot of Gestalt sort of types of interventions and things like that. And this kind of links to Indigo's question from before, doesn't it? In that, you know, like there's that fine balance when, you know, David's got this sort of background and, you know, is a master of his craft with the narrative coaching techniques and things like that. And we may not, I guess this links to me answering the question around shifting development, is that, you know, not everyone who's a coach has psychosomatic or psychology backgrounds, or has been experts like I suppose you and I are in understanding if clients are ready. And I think that there's an opportunity here in the coaching world to be a bit more vulnerable as a coach.
Yeah.
And we don't have to be so techniquey. You can actually say, and I say this to folks that I mentor, I go, gosh, you know, like that seemed really powerful to me. Like, how was that for you?
Yeah.
Right. Or, you know, I get a sense we might need to move over here a little bit. Like, how would that be for you? You know, and just coaxing people a little bit, or, you know, gosh, that question was really a stinker. That went nowhere. Yeah, that went nowhere. Like, what else should I be asking here?
Yeah.
Or, you know, are you, you know, it feels like you're a little tentative right now to talk about this. Like, how are you feeling about it? But really trying to engage the client in their own reality. And like I said before, about taking those small steps to take tiny little risks if you don't feel comfortable. Whereas, you know, kind of the old way of doing things would be, as you said, David, before, around, you know, so how are you feeling now, Bob? Or if you knew the answer to that question, what would you be saying right now?
I'd be slapping my coach if somebody asked me that.
You know, whereas I think that as we've been talking about, you know, it's not just the pandemic. I also think, and I hate to say this, everyone who's on this call is probably a professional coach, but I tend to be a cat amongst the pigeons in the industry. So I believe individual coaching is a commodity right now. And so therefore, because it's a commodity, there's an opportunity there in that, you know, the client is going to have lots of choice out there and going to get a good rate for the services and etc. And this lends itself to what we're talking about on this slide here, I think.
Yeah.
In that the organization in most of our lives, you know, in most of our coaching lives, so to speak, the client knows what they're paying you for, and you've got a client brief that's clearly defined if you're in an organizational context. But of course, it's nothing like that anyway once you get in there. But I guess what I'm trying to say here is that, how do you free yourself as the coach to those shackles and kind of go, okay, so what are we really doing in this conversation together? Like what's really going to be advancing and enriching for what you want to have for yourself, so that we can start dialoguing, so that we're not held to this construct of what good looks like as coaches, but we're being in service to what's on offer for both of us in that conversation.
That's a great point. I'm going to pick up on something you said, because I want to reinforce that too, about I know my mind just went blank, so I'm going to start with the second part of this, what I was going to say. To somebody's point a minute ago, I saw in the chat, Fiona's. Yeah, so a lot of companies are still focused on content. So I'll go back to wanting to, really needing to engage our clients about what's, to shift that perception about this. I wish I could remember what I was going to say now, but it felt like a good point. But it had to do with what you're saying about, oh yes, the duty of care piece around, yeah, I mean, people come to coaching from all kinds of backgrounds. I've evolved what I do for a long time. So, but think about that. If you let go of the fear/belief that you have to know everything to do, or that you have to be able to respond to anything that comes from your client, which often means we don't try things. So even if to add to Tammy's point, even if all you did, like, when you go to the doctor for something and they say on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate your pain? So, which I had surgery this morning on my hand, so I can relate to that. You could easily, even if this is new for you to think about coaching this way, you could ask yourself that very simple question in the back of your mind. So let's say you ask the client a question. Maybe it's even kind of a challenging or a probing question. You could just ask yourself, on a scale of 1 to 10, how far in did that question go? Or how much do I think the client is actually revealing in their answer? And you might say, oh, that's a 2. Okay, so note to self. They probably don't want a lot of big follow-up questions. This is something that's sensitive for them or new for them. I might say that's a 9. Great, let's go for it. Let's have that conversation finally, where they get to really speak to the truth of what's happening for them. And to Tammy's point, it doesn't mean that we have to necessarily do something differently or have an answer for them. It just means we have to adjust our questions and enroll them with us, and like, well, that obviously is a very intense reaction in you. Let's talk about that, right? So just keep that alive in the room, rather than feel like you've got to take it on just because somehow the conversations become deeper or more significant. So, yeah.
It kind of goes to the next question, doesn't it, David?
Yeah.
I think anyway, in that, how can we work on what is real rather than chase the ideal? Because I think that, in some of the examples that you've used, and I noticed this, if I'm on stage teaching or whatever it is, where, because I've been doing the work for so long, I can rattle off these examples and how I would work with it and so on. And that can sometimes feel daunting to a newer coach, or to somebody who wants to be, like, I want to do the things the way David does.
Yeah.
I don't know why, but no, I'm kidding.
A lie? Oh no, I'm crushed.
But
this is not working for some reason. No, go ahead.
Yeah, but what I was going to say is that I think that, somehow or another we've taught this, this sterile way of doing coaching around, like, I've gotten up in ICF conferences and literally set people up. I'll set everyone up right now. How many people go into a coaching session judgment-free? Show of hands. Judgment-free? Yeah. It's hogwash. You can never be judgment-free, ever. Sorry to set you up this way, but it's about, noticing, this is, to me, this is one of those, we have this ideal about the fact that we're judgment free, right? And it's lovely. We don't want to judge our clients, right? No one does. That would be so unethical. but equally to know that I've got a judgment in that moment. I don't like coaching bullies, right? I will sit across from somebody and I'll go, can I actually coach that person? They're coming across pretty aggressive, etc. Or am I put here to be of service because that person is that way and I've been called to help that person? And so I need to know inside myself how that person's behavior is in that ecosystem of impacting on me so that I can be as neutral as possible. But I also notice that sometimes, you know, just like all of us, I can get off track and I go, wow, I can't believe that you don't support Roe versus Wade. You know, I'm a woman. How come you're not supporting it that way, thinking about it that way, or whatever the thing happens to be that comes up in the topic in that moment? You know, because we're also human beings. And so to really put that in the middle of the table, so to speak, for, you know, metaphorical table, to be able to kind of talk with the client about, so why is this important to you in this moment? And a good example of this, I think, and then I'll turn back to you, David, is that, because you brought this up in me just a moment ago, was that, you know, and I've coached so many men throughout my history. It's gender bias here, by the way, guys. Men who come into a session and go, you know, I am really frustrated with my boss. You know, my boss just really torques me off. And they're exactly in the tone of voice that I just said.
Yeah.
So then if we go to readiness, David Drake, which is what you're doing your principle on, are they actually ready to work with that?
No.
Whereas, you know, like I love clients like this because I go, wow, like there's so much energy bottled up inside you. How do we get to that so that you can start making change? Right. And so those are some of the small experiments and risks that you can talk about with just basic coaching skills that you don't necessarily need to have things like, I like to do constellations work, for example, or stakeholder mapping with teams or whatever, which are the same examples that we're using of a technique-y type of stuff to get to that energy. But can you kind of point it out in the moment, or can you just work with it and be curious about it, which is what we are all very highly skilled in doing. Going back to David's example of the helper being the better coach than the professional coach, because they're just genuinely curious.
Yeah.
What about for you, David, on this question?
Yeah, so I wanted to explain that some of you will have heard this, but I wanted to share the story behind why I chose this photo with this question. So like I years ago, I stopped using 360s as people were trying to strive to fill in these bar graphs and meet these all kinds of things. And unless it was providing something that was novel information for the client, I tended to find them not super helpful. But the picture came actually from an experience I had maybe 2 years ago when I was at the airport in San Francisco. And, you know, the people that work for the security at the airports are amongst the most lowest paid, most scorned, I mean, it's really not a very good, healthy environment for them at all. I really feel for them. So I try to be kind and as patient as I can be when sometimes their systems are really not very useful and not very organized, et cetera. Anyways, I was going through this line and there was a man about my age in a wheelchair right behind me. And the story I made up was that he had just come back from a round of chemo or whatever. It was not in a good way. Maybe even had gotten bad news. And there was 2 like trainees at our line. And he had a bag in his lap of all the medications he was on. This entire bag was filled with medicine. And they were like, oh, we have to, and it was all legit. It was all the right size and all that kind of stuff. But they had to go through every one and do all these things. And he was getting so distraught. And then something broke on the machine. And these poor people are starting to feel really exasperated themselves. And he just breaks down and he starts weeping and he said, can I just go through? I just need to get on the plane and go home. And well, I'm sorry, sir. Then they started getting more flustered, and so again, that's where the question came from. So there's nothing ideal about this situation. So the whole line's now backing up through the lobby. So there is no ideal here for anybody. Nobody's happy in this situation, not the least of which is him. So I'm asking myself, what can I do here to intervene with TSA? You risk creating trouble you don't want to be in. These people really felt for him, so it wasn't like they were purposely being mean or whatever. And so I went back, I waited, and I went back and I looked at him and I said, "Is it okay if I put my hand on your shoulder?" And he said, "Sure." And he's kind of, and I just kept my hand there and I said, "I'm sorry, this is so hard." And I just waited. And he kept crying, and then finally they got their boss over to fix the whatever and get him on his way. And and he just put his head down and he rolled away off to his plane. And for me, it was just a great lesson about coaching, because again, we're often, if we're not careful, chasing lots of things in coaching. And the ideal about how this leader should be and how they should act and how they should talk. And they're often pressured to fulfill all kinds of ideals around them. And I'm just more and more interested in pragmatically, from an enlightened perspective, what is real here that I can work with?
Yeah.
And the only real point of contact, I couldn't make this man's illness go away. I couldn't fix these poor flustered agents. I couldn't fix a completely broken TSA system. There was nothing I could do except for offer him a moment of compassion that was respectful for him. And so for me, I just take this. So he has been an extraordinary teacher, even for me after all these years. I think about him all the time when I'm coaching. What can I do right now that's real for this person that would add value to their life right now?
Yeah, beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I love what you're saying as well, David, because it goes back to what you have been challenging us on before. It's not like you needed to bring in some sort of methodology to do that.
No, I had to risk.
You had to risk
myself out there.
Yeah. And you also had to connect with him on a human level and put him at the center of his own ecosystem.
Yes.
Right? It's not about you in that moment. So it's a really great example about what you're challenging us all to think about.
And I did the same for the TSA agents. They were probably in their late 20s or something. I just made eye contact with them to basically say, "I see you, and I see that you're trying, and that you two are." The woman was nearly crying herself because she realized she didn't know how to make this any better for him. So I guess I think we've got about 15 more minutes. So I'd like to just switch gears and just make sure to see if there's any other questions or things that have come up. I'm going to leave this up for a minute. For some reason, the slides are not cooperating, but anything else you'd like to share or add from the group before we move on? I want to tell you about a project that Tammy and I have got coming up that we'd like to see if you'd like to be involved in. So I just want to make sure we've covered anything that's important for those of you who have come before we switch gears a bit.
Everybody's in a meditative, philosophical space, David.
Excellent.
David, I'm wondering if we can pull the slides down so that we might get more of a group view in case anybody's signaling in the chat or via their video.
I'd like to share.
Yeah, Michelle.
Hello. It's nice to see you all. I've got a peer of mine, Stephanie, here in the room as well. And what came into the room was when I saw that image, David, and even Tammy, you came in the room as well about bringing the word about judgment. And what came into the room was a few of peers that we met here through going through David's work. We were working on a coaching project in New York. And at that stage, one of the coaching peers, we're all coaches, was having a very difficult problem. And I suppose if we hadn't done David's work, we could have said, well, can we just put it aside for a second? Because we've got this critical work to do. Yet what we did was we all just stopped. And as David expressed what happened with the young man, was we all stopped and had a moment of supporting a person by an experience with hands on back. So in that moment, we just sat there. I'm the only one in Sydney, they're all in the US, and just asked her to sit there and be how she wants to be, even turn her back on us as we raised our hands, so that she felt the support in that moment of what she's needed.
Nice.
And in that moment, if judgment came into the room, or we thought only about the money or the client, then she would have or could have been not heard or seen. So thank you, David. You inspired us with a moment, even though we never heard of hands on back with you. It was what was needed in the moment.
Yeah.
I just wanted to share that.
Thank you, Michelle. I think we often underestimate how powerful these small gestures we make for clients. We want the drama and the big conversation or the big reveal, but often clients need much smaller but more poignant and powerful things. The sessions with us.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
If one thing COVID and lockdown taught us was exactly what you just said. Truly.
Yeah. And I hope you don't forget that. All right. I'm going to put the slides back up, and I want to just share this with you, just sort of as a way to summarize this, and then I want to share a bit about this pilot that we're doing. And this is one of my all-time favorite places in the world, at Ghost Ranch in New Mexico in the US. All right. So we have an opportunity for you. So one of my clients has a platform, and it is an AI-based platform, although that's sort of secondary in a way, but allows you to record a coaching conversation. Right now we're doing it with peer-to-peer coaches. And then the video recording as well as the transcription of the video recording are available on the same platform, as is the capacity for, in this case, me and the current pilot I'm doing, to provide feedback on marked at the critical moments in the conversation, both by AI and myself, make comments about kind of feedback or suggestions or affirmations about what we're observing in the video. And then we have an opportunity for myself and each of the two pairs to debrief that together. And what we're finding is, for people like Tammy and I who do supervision and reviews of people's videos, because of the way it's structured, you can actually get through a video in about a third of the time or less than you would normally spend having to go through all this and keep notes and all of that. And two, it's a great dialogue and much more impactful, we're discovering, for the coach, because then rather than just talking to a remembrance of a conversation, the conversation's right there, and you can pause it, you can look at either the words or the video. And so maybe there's some body language issues for the coach that we want to draw their attention to. We can freeze frame the video, show them the body language, but then the person they were coaching is also on the call. Well, how did that feel for you when you noticed the coach doing that? Oh, I started to really doubt that the coach was very confident, or this is how I felt, or this is what the story I was making up about that. And so the coach is not only getting literal feedback from me and literal data from the video and the transcript, but they're getting real time about the experience of the coachee when that happened. And what we're finding is that sort of constellation of feedbacks, all in real time, is yielding much better and more actionable insights than anything I've ever done in terms of trying to give feedback to people, which is always removed from the actual session, removed from the actual client, removed in time. And we're also going to now use this a little bit next year through some work with Anne. We can actually use this as a teaching tool. You could pause a demo and ask your students, what would you say next and why? Or where do you think this conversation is going? Or what stands out for you about this video you've just watched? And you can actually play the actual video and then talk about that. Anyways, so Tammy and I are going to be starting another pilot in the early part of January for up to 8 weeks on the platform. And it's an opportunity to have some peer coaching sessions with somebody we'll pair you up with in your time zone. You'll have written feedback from either Tammy or I about all the sessions that you do on the platform, so you can see it 24/7. And then we're going to have 2 small group mentoring sessions with you, either Tammy or I, depending on who you're working with, to kind of go over the sessions, the feedback, see what stands out. At the first one, you can create some objectives for yourself. You like say, oh, I realize I don't pause very long. I ask a question and I'm already into it again, or a client says something and I feel a need to respond. So I want to work on pausing. And the AI will help you track some of that, and the coach will also help you track some of that. So then you can, when you come back, for your second mentoring session, you can actually then look at the data which the AI will track for you. But how much did you pause? Did the pausing get better? And if so, what are you taking from that? What helped you pause? And so anyway, so we're just at a point of gathering interest. So if this would interest you and something that you'd find valuable for your practice, you can just click on the link on the slide. Emily, if I don't have the chat box open at the moment, could you put that in the chat box if you've not already?
Yeah, it's already in there, David.
I know, I had to ask just in case, but I knew you'd be ahead of me as always. So yeah, it would be great. So just click on the link. It's just a letter of interest. And then on the 10th or so of December, we'll organize to get that sent out. And then Tammy and her team are going to help kind of organize the logistics of registrations and all those kind of things. And then I've got some documents we'll send you about the platform, and then we'll have an orientation in early January, and then we'll go at it. But for me, I find it's really exciting. I'm just really appreciating the way it's accelerating the capacity of coaches to work on things that are important to them. And Tammy, you've had a little bit of exposure so far. Is there anything you'd like to add about this, or what interests you about this pilot?
Well, I was going to pick up on something slightly different, but I'll weave that into it, is that I love what you just said about capacity. Like, I think that's a nuance that the professional bodies are not looking at today. When you were talking about, what do we need to develop for ourselves, is that, the codes are predominantly focused on competency and capability. And, we need those, right? I don't want those to go anywhere.
Right.
We need to be able to communicate properly as coaches. But what I've really liked about using this technology is that you're really being able to look at your capacity about, like, how am I feeling? Like, do I look that tired in real life when I see myself on the screen? But also, like, then what's the impact of that if I happen to be tired to what's happening with my client?
Yeah.
Or, and I think this is hard when I notice when I mentor people through the ICF core competencies, is that, because you're going to be paired with someone else who's a coach, you can actually get the feedback from them, but you can also kind of look more at that how can I say this, that ecosystem that I've been talking about today, where like I'm putting my focus on the other. Whereas I think that when we're being recorded, what ends up happening is that the focus goes on us and you go, eek, there's that red button that's flashing. Whereas, you know, this sort of pilot, what's great about it is the opportunity for you to be able to kind of see how you're relating to another person without the constructs of the competencies. So that you can be able to really go for mastery in your own way, in your own style, and the way that you like to do things or look for habits. So that's what I've really enjoyed about the platform so far.
That's great. And I probably have done more reviews than any coach on the planet yet so far on this new platform, but it has been one of my surprises about not the value of it, but that it was so much better this way, and that you can pause the video when you're doing the debrief, and rather than, as you said, Tammy, focus on the competence, like what did you do here, you can ask, what were you thinking, what was going through your mind as that was happening for you, and which again we don't get to enough when we're doing after the fact feedback. It's harder for a client a coach to reconstruct their mindset. It's right there. They go, oh yeah, I was realizing I have no idea what this person's talking about, but I didn't know what to say. So I just made up some question. Oh, okay. So next time, what else might you do when you don't know what's going on? Oh, I could just pause and ask for clarification. Yeah, what a great, but getting that insight on themselves is just really an extraordinary gift. And again, all of that's right there present to them. And so anyway, so that we're nearing the end of our first pilot. It's just been fantastic, and technology, they just upgraded their platforms today, so we have even a better back-end technology for the video and everything, so I'm really excited. I've not looked at it yet, I was here instead, but I'm looking forward to it a lot. So if that interests you, you're more than welcome. Just click on the link, register your interest, and then we'll send you some more information. So I'm just going to end here. That's just us. And I want to thank Tammy for her time. I've stopped the share now. And see, we've got a few folks left. I know it's late for all the Europeans who have now gone to bed. And yeah. But I just want to see if there's anything else that you're taking with you that you would like to share before we close. All right.
I think to what Tammy said earlier, a lot to absorb and in quite a philosophical state, and that's a positive thing, and always love that session. So thank you guys so much.
Yeah, thank you, Fiona.
Thanks, Fiona.
And thanks to good to see Amy again. I want to thank Emily too for being our wonderful host for today and making sure all that part worked. And yeah,
We have Rose as well, I think, David.
What's that?
I think Rose had a comment to make as well.
Okay, I missed her hand. There you are, Rose.
Yeah, it was music to my ears. It was very validating. It was very inspiring. And I love this direction as opposed to the performance coaching that seems to be in the air all around us.
Yeah. So we're going to do a lot more of these conversations. We're going to do one of these conversations every month. And like I said, Tammy and I are already conspiring for other things we can do together again. And we've got another collaboration next year all around these big questions. It just feels like the world needs coaching to evolve faster than it is. And so we're just looking for more and more ways that we can do that. Yeah.
Glad to discover it.
Yeah. We have the dueling Fionas. Great. All right. So thank you all. Thank you again, Tammy. It's so wonderful to spend time with you, and thank you for sharing all of your experience and kicking off our very first BCE. So great to have you here.
It's been a delight. And thank you all so much for coming and spending the time with David and I.
Thank you.
Appreciate. Thank you so much. This was awesome.
Wonderful. All right. Be well, my friends. We'll see you again another time.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.